There are fears the number of schools impacted by the concrete crisis could rise as hundreds of schools still have no idea if they're teaching in unsafe buildings because checks will not be fully completed, the department says, until December.
This map shows the current list of schools which have been reported as being affected by the sudden closures. The Department of Education is yet to release the full list. Well, we're joined now by Sarah Skinner, who is the Chief Executive of Penrose Learning Trust in Suffolk, which has 3 affected schools. And we're also joined by the former Children's Commissioner, Anne Longfield. Very good morning to you all. Sarah Skinner, just give us an idea of when you found out that you would have to stop children going into certain parts of your schools.
Good morning. Yes, it was Thursday afternoon. I had a call from the DfE. I jumped on a Zoom call with them. We had a very long and detailed conversation about the implications. And then on Friday, of course, we were working to start to mitigate some of the issues.
Sarah, as we understand it, the department was in touch with you to complete a survey about whether you had this difficult concrete in July, the 11th to the 14th of July. We reported that potentially thousands of schools were at risk back in March when Dan Hewitt produced his Freedom of Information request. Just to be clear, between the 20th of March and the 11th of July, did you have any communication at all with the department asking you whether or not you might have this concrete in your building?
So we had our own deep dive surveys done in 2019. So we were aware in our own schools of the situation and where any remedial works that needed to be done and the areas that were safe. We did have communication that surveys would be done. So our surveys were actually done in our schools on the 11th of July and a few days subsequently. There were some suggestions about further mediation, but of course all our RAC at that point we deemed safe. So the issue over the summer that now deems it unsafe has led to us needing to obviously take immediate action.
But between the 20th of March and the 11th of July, you hadn't had communication?
I can't hand on heart say that. I get a lot of communications, but to my knowledge, after we sent the survey back, there was nothing further.
So basically you believed in July that your buildings were safe. You'd completed the survey, the action had been taken. You'd been told by the Department of Education, it's all right, your buildings are safe, and you expect to open today to all pupils. And then on Thursday, you get this warning, actually, the concrete that you have, we now don't believe is safe anymore. So what then did you have to do between Thursday and today?
So Friday was spent making sure that staff were aware that they couldn't be in school on Friday. So we shut the schools to teachers on Friday to just ensure nobody would enter anywhere that they weren't permitted to. I have a central team. We're a trust of 8 schools, so I have an estates team. We sat and worked through trying to get surveyors because we had 2 schools with undetermined areas, so we needed to get surveyors out so we were aware of whether those areas were safe or were also going to go into what we're calling the red zone. I managed to get a surveyor out to one school on Friday afternoon, and I have a surveyor at this school this morning, so I'll be fully aware of the picture for the return, which will be for some students on Thursday.
Sarah Skinner, thanks very much indeed. We're about to be joined by the Secretary of State for Education. But first of all, the former Children's Commissioner, Anne Longfield. Of course, there'll be lots of parents watching these stories in recent days, seeing some schools closing, but not knowing if their children are going to a school which is at risk, might be on a list which has not yet been revealed. They're not one of the 150 publicly named schools.
Well, I think clearly it's a mess, and there'll be parents around the country that have been plunged into confusion and uncertainty and really painful memories of how uncertain education was during the pandemic. We know certain things, as we've been discussing, about the schools at the moment, but it's just that, you know, I think parents are steeling themselves to be told that there's another layer of horrors here coming forward. It isn't being dealt with at the speed that's needed. We haven't had the eye on the ball from government in terms of this. schools should be educating our children, should be our national endeavour. We should never get into the point where it's something that's left to chance.
Anne Longfield, we have to speak to the Secretary of State now. Thank you, both of you, for joining us this morning. Gillian Keegan is at Westminster. Gillian Keegan, this is a mess, isn't it?
Well, let me explain what happened over the summer. We had 3 incidents that were brought to our attention, some in educational settings, some not in educational settings, and 1 outside our jurisdiction. I was able to send structural engineers into 2 of those, get access to those buildings. And what they found, and this is why I've changed the advice, and this was towards the end of August, the last one, is there was a ceiling that would previously be assessed as non-critical, where a panel had fallen down. Now, it was only 1 panel, and there's only 1 incident, but that had that characteristics. We came back and we spoke to the Institution of Structural Engineers and other experts, and basically what the previous advice had been is if it's non-critical, you just need to continue assessing it and monitoring it. But I took the cautious decision, and it is very cautious, that I didn't want to risk this happening anywhere. So I changed the guidance on non-critical roofs to say we had to do the same as we'd done with the critical ones, which is prop them up or get temporary accommodation in place. And I do understand that for parents and for the head teachers who were affected, that was last minute. But you can only act on the evidence when it emerges. And that incident happened, and we got the information towards the end of August. And that's why it changed.
OK, can I just take you back to March, when ITV News' investigative reporter, Daniel Hewitt, reported this.
Our investigation found not only that 68 schools have it, but more than 1,500 don't know whether they've got it or not, and they're buildings that were built around this period. Our investigation found that over 2,000 schools still haven't had an inspection. So right now there will be schools with no idea whether they have this or not.
That was back in March. We're now in September, and you won't know the full scale of this until the end of the year. Daniel said at the time, in March, that he had not had an interview at that point when he reported that with the Department for Education. And we bid for an interview with you or one of your ministers back in March and could not get anywhere with this. It seems remarkable that now, the first day of term, we're in the situation we're in when you knew the scale of this back in March.
Well, I would have been very happy to come on, Susanna. I'm always happy to answer any questions. What we did, so basically the responsible bodies, local authorities and trusts are responsible for school buildings, not the Department for Education. What we did in 2018 is we issued a warning to all schools based on an instance that had happened in a school in Kent. And we did that with the Local Government Association. And they were supposed to be checking all of the ceilings, doing the analysis, etc. In March last year, March 22, we decided as the department to go belt and braces on this because we were not sure, we didn't have visibility of what everybody was doing as a responsible body. So we sent a question, we identified the just under 15,000 schools that could have RAC because they were built within the period. We sent out a detailed questionnaire with guidance on how they identified RAC. 90% of those came back. The vast majority of them do not have RAC. Of the 90% that came back, only 1% of them had any kind of suspected RAC. With those, we employed directly building surveyors, and we went out to each one of those schools, and then we identified, or the building surveyors did, whether it was critical or non-critical. Critical, we immediately propped up or put alternative accommodation in place. Non-critical, we were following the guidance of the Institution of Structural Engineers, which was just to get the responsible bodies to keep monitoring it. I changed that towards the end of August because a panel fell down that was in a ceiling that the engineers said would be assessed as non-critical. And I took the cautious approach to basically say all the non-critical are critical.
Structural engineers got it wrong?
The structural, I mean, the advice on RAC has been evolving over time. And the reason we knew about these cases is we have our own structural engineers, our own ones who say, go out and look at any case, wherever it is. So this was actually in another jurisdiction. So they went up there and they basically looked at this case. So we have been very proactive to say, we will do the questionnaires to get the detailed information. We will do the surveys ourselves. And we have employed, now we've got 8 building surveyors, companies going out and doing them all, so we can do them all very quickly, those that still have to be done. We've directly employed porter cabins so that we can get this all done very quickly for those that need it. And we've also got a national propping service as well. We've also put caseworkers in place for each one of the schools so that we can work with them to make sure we minimise disruption for children. But I've taken a very, very cautious approach, more cautious than anybody, but it's new information.
Can I just ask you about the information which you have? Because, you know, it's your job to make sure that when you have information that you act upon it. And as you said, there were schools who didn't complete the survey. We know back in March that there were thousands of schools who were potentially at risk. Have you, between March and your action in August, have you received a list of schools where there might be a risk of this concrete being in place, where maybe the school hadn't replied to the survey? Is there a list which you have received in advice from civil servants with the names of schools which you have so far not publicly revealed to parents?
We have the responsible bodies that have still got to complete for some schools, and we've chased them up. I also put in place a call centre to phone them up and say, you need to fill this questionnaire in. It is their job, by the way, to do this.
I'm asking a very precise question, though. Have you received advice from civil servants in your department in the last 6 months with a list of schools which officials fear may be at risk, which you have chosen not to reveal so far to parents?
No, we have a list of responsible bodies who have to detail each of the schools with the survey coming back.
So you've not ever had a list of schools?
We have a list of 156 schools.
But I'm talking about the schools which might be at risk, which aren't on the list.
No, we have the responsible bodies and we've asked them to give us the details at each school level. And actually, all of this publicity, I think, hopefully will really mean that they'll put a push on with that. There's not many of them, to be fair. The vast majority have sent back the detailed questionnaires. And when we've looked at them, the vast majority don't have any RAC. It's only 1% of the 90% that have any RAC.
Quoted 1,500 schools in the Freedom of Information request he had. You've never asked for the list of those schools. You've never received that list of potentially 1,500 or more schools, and you've never acted to tell parents that their children may be in one of those schools which could be at risk.
Well, all of this advice, by the way, in terms of critical and non-critical, only changed at the end of August. I mean, there's been warnings on RAC. Indeed, when you were Education Secretary, you were told to check all the roofs by the Standing Committee on Structural Safety, you know, twice. So there's been a lot of requests for this. We have taken it in. As you know, Ed, the responsible bodies are responsible for building safety. What we've done is go above and beyond. For the first time, we're probably the government that has got more detail of RAC in their schools than any other government, and certainly than the Welsh government and the Scottish government, because we have not relied on the responsible bodies. We've been pushing them to get the questionnaires.
I just don't really understand how. In March, we reported, on the basis of an FOI request, that there were 1,500 plus schools which might be at risk, where you didn't have the information, but they were worried because of the period in which they were built. Why didn't you, one, in the period between March and August, go to those individual schools and ask them that question?
We have.
But secondly, what you have done.
So
you did have a list of those schools. So you did have a list of those schools.
We've been going through the responsible bodies to say, give us a list of all the schools.
Look, I was the Secretary of State. You're the Secretary of State. You know, you don't have to go to the responsible bodies. You can go direct to the schools. If you fear that children are at risk in a school, you can go directly to those 1,500 head teachers and ask them the question. And what I don't understand is, why didn't you go to those...
We've made it very clear to head teachers. We've put it out in many, many channels.
So you have been to the 1,500 schools?
That this questionnaire is due. In some cases now, we've just sent surveyors in. You know, the responsibility here is of the responsible bodies.
You didn't act on that list?
They have to act on the list. I mean, the reality is we have given them the questionnaire, we've given them the surveyors. All we need to do is get the response. Most of them, the vast majority have done it. More and more are coming in now as this. And this is the first time any government has done it, and the other governments in the devolved administrations have not done this.
I think if I was a parent and my children were at school on that list and I hadn't been told by you, I would think, why didn't you tell me?
Well, nobody else has even asked to get a list, let alone a questionnaire.
We asked you in March to come on our programme and tell us about this list, and you wouldn't come on.
The response. Well, to be honest, I did. As I say, I come on to anybody.
Well,
nobody
we asked you
else,
on the
including
programme. We
you,
asked you
Ed,
the day before. No education minister would come on the programme to talk about this list.
I've been very open. I've been very open about this. We have taken this into our own hands, which you never did when you were Secretary of State for Education. Nobody else has done previously.
I don't know what that means.
We have done it. We have done our own questionnaire to find out. We've identified all the potential buildings. We've written to every single responsible body saying you need to give us this information, detailed questionnaire. We've hired building surveyors. We've sent them into every single one where there's suspected RAC. The vast majority, there's no suspected RAC. So of the 90% who've come back, only 1% have had suspected RAC. And most of that is in, in areas that it's not really a danger at all. So we have more information. I have more information. The reason I, as the Secretary of State, this August could take the decision to change from the non-critical status to critical is because I knew where their schools were and I knew which ones had been identified as non-critical. You couldn't have done that, and actually the Welsh Education Secretary can't now.
So we have done a lot more. You may need to publish your list. Gillian Keegan,
we will publish the list this week.
OK, great.
Yes.
Thank you. That's really, really good to know. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme. Really appreciate your time.